as you're coming in, if you wouldn't mind, just be interested to see what institutions are represented as you come here. So if you have a moment, you want to put your name and just what your institution is in the chat, that'd be great to start seeing. Doc, CBU, Alaska, Western Seminary. Hey, Brad. More Western Seminary. It's like we have lots of people coming in. Indiana Wesleyan. We'll get a few minutes, let people come in. UTEP, I'm not familiar with that acronym. I could guess, but
University of Texas,
I was going to say, yeah, okay. Fortis College, some LAPU folks, Western.
No, Peggy, I'm not.
Okay.
Well, as we prepare to get started here this morning, I think we're 11:03. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Just want to welcome you all. My name is Brant Himes. I'm here with my colleagues, John Washaka and Carrie Ekman. John and I are faculty, and Carrie is a senior success coach. She works with our students directly. And we're just excited to be here hosting, have an opportunity to talk about collaborative approaches to holistic learning. John, myself, and Carrie, we're going to each take a few minutes to present our ideas, but what we're really looking forward to is the last part of the presentation when we get to field questions from you. So I hope that you will take an opportunity to put questions in the chat, and then when we get to that section of the presentation, I will facilitate our questions and have a conversation with John and Carrie and you all. So again, welcome to this webinar series hosted by LAPU on human-centered learning and design. This is a series that we've been doing. We have webinars every couple months. Just to put it on your calendar, our next webinar is going to be Thursday, July 21st, and that's going to be focused on developing social presence in online courses. So you can look forward to that. But for now, we're going to jump in on collaborative approaches to holistic learning. I do want to note that the session is being recorded, and we also have closed captionings available. You can access those by clicking on the closed captioning CC live transcript button on your Zoom call. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to John, and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Brant. Hi, folks. My name is John Washaka, and I am an associate professor of humanities here at LAPU. And I'm one of the co-editors of the book that this whole conversation is going to revolve around. The name of the book is Faith, Life, and Learning Online. And a lot the topics that we are going to be talking about are actually pulled out of the book. What I want to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to talk about three of the main distinctives that we think are important as we talk about faith integration and collaborative learning, holistic learning at LAPU. And the first distinctive that I want to mention, or that I want to bring up, is this idea of a collaborative governance model. You may have heard of the term shared governance. We have a similar sort of a governing model, and we call it collaborative model. It's distinct, I mean, the contrast that we typically think of is either it's an academic governance or shared governance. And so if you're looking for a contrast or a comparative way of thinking about this, it would be an academic governance. So our university professor, Dr. John Reynolds, wrote a chapter in the book on collaborative governance, and he describes it as common ownership and support through a process of shared thinking and discussion. Essentially, collaborative governance allows for and anticipates responsibility and accountability shared across various work groups. If you are familiar with higher education rhetoric, the ivory tower, right? This idea of isolated faculty sort of way of doing things is overcome. The ivory tower is torn down. The walls and the obstacles are much less because of this idea of a collaborative governance model. A governance model that has the principle of collaboration as part of its identity and structure is less likely to rely on the voluntary efforts of individuals and groups to achieve the goals of the organization. Which is to say, I like this concept of baked in. This idea of governance has as part of its structure the idea that collaboration is baked in. It doesn't rely on the serendipitous nature of personalities or how one person feels one day as opposed to how they feel another day. This idea of collaboration is part and parcel of who we are as a university, and it's not something that we can help doing. It's part of what we do. Overall, a collaborative model enables greater operational efficiencies such that the university can pivot and respond more quickly to the market, to the educational market, than if it had a more traditional governance model. So broadly speaking and generally speaking, a shared governance model allows us, and like I mentioned, I think I like the word pivot, we can respond to what's going on in the market more quickly than if we had a more traditional governance model. This has nothing to do with, in this case, faith integration or collaborative learning or holistic learning. Those are just some ways in which we can and have pivoted, towards faith integration, towards this idea of student success. This shared governance model, this collaborative governance model sees the model enables us to do that. Dr. Reynolds sees collaboration as essential to an online university, both in organizational sustainability and student success. With the student demographic overall moving more and more towards what we consider to be a post-traditional student, right? An adult post-traditional student who won't step onto a traditional campus. Towards a post-traditional university organizational structure, higher educational institutions are rethinking what their organizational structure should look like and are considering alternative governance models, again, that enables the university to be more sustainable and that enables it to achieve its goals of student success and other practices that the university wants to do. So that's the collaborative governance model. That's the first distinctive. The second distinctive of the university is the success coach model. I'm not going to say much here because, as Brant mentioned, Carrie Ackerman, who is a senior success coach, is going to be talking about what that looks like. She actually wrote the chapter on success coaches, and I don't want to step on her toes or say anything that she wants to say. But I do want to make a couple of comments. First, the role of a success coach or life coach or academic success coach or academic support coach, that role has become more and more common in higher education, especially for those institutions that are moving towards a post-traditional model. The reason why it's becoming more popular is because universities like us who serve the post-traditional student have recognized the needs of post-traditional students and that they are much different than the traditional student. And so this idea of a success coach, the role of a success coach, is one of support and success for the students. while it is a common factor, the other comment I want to make is that what I want to suggest is that LAPU has implemented or built out that role in a way that is fairly unique among institutions. So I'm going to let Carrie talk more about that. Lastly, what I want to say is that the success coach model, which includes working with academics, enrollment, and financial aid for the purposes of student support and success, is a most excellent example of institutional collaboration. You know, the success coach is tied into all of these different areas in such a fashion that they can't do their job if they are not reaching across to these various other work groups. The last distinctive I want to mention is that LAPU has a standardized curriculum, and the point or the goal of the standardized curriculum is to create a shared learning experiences for students across courses. Courses have a similar look and feel, so students are able to navigate their courses with a minimum amount of disruption and confusion. So pretty much the classes have a standard look and a standard feel, so that students can navigate in the course shells online between courses in such a way that they're going to know what they're going to experience. But what I do want to say is that standardization doesn't necessarily mean uniformity across the board, but the courses adhere to a common structure and formatting. And I think when we talk about a standardized curriculum, I want to use this analogy, and I think it's kind of dangerous, but I'm going to do it anyway. The closest analogy I can think of is American traffic laws. And for those of you who live in Southern California, I'm sure you're thinking, what traffic laws? Traffic doesn't move. But when you think about it, you know, when you think about stoplights, they're all formatted the same way, right? If they're vertical, red is on top, yellow is in the middle, and green is on the bottom. If they are horizontal, red is to the left, yellow is in the center, green is to the right. So there's a standardization among the stoplights, but how stoplights function, you know, how long they are green, how long they are yellow, how long they are red, just depends from stoplight to stoplight. Although all of us can pretty much, you know, swear to the fact that we always have the longest red, right? We're always sitting the longest. So there are some variances, but again, it's within the structure. We always drive on the right side of the road. Well, I mean, we're supposed to, most of us should, most of us do, but the road itself, it could be 2 lanes, it could be 4 lanes, it could be 10 lanes, you know, so there is some standardization, but there is variation within the standardization. When it comes to teaching, a standardized curriculum relies on the specific personality and experience of an individual instructor to be delivered. Okay, let's see. Hang on to that thought. So a standardized curriculum relies on the specific personality and experience of an individual instructor to be delivered successfully, primarily in their interactions with students and their ability to assess work according to established rubrics. All that means is that we don't hold instructors responsible for the content of the course. That's part of the standardized curriculum build-out process. So the instructors are primarily responsible for creating this relationship with the students, along with this very functional task of grading their work. And so the context, again, is so that the students can be as successful as possible. All right, to summarize, LAPU has 3 organizational distinctives: collaborative governance, a unique success coach model, and standardized curriculum. Generally, the distinctives have student success as their common goal and enable the university to achieve that goal more easily. Specifically, and in the context of this conversation, the distinctives have enabled the university to develop faith integration across the institution in a seamless and efficient manner that has resulted in a university-wide experience for all students. In other words, the university engages in holistic education across the entire university for all students, for the entire student. All right, I'm going to turn things over now to Brant, who's going to talk more about collaboration and holistic learning.
All right, thanks, John. If you had questions that were kind of swirling in your mind during John's presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat. And like I said, when we get to that portion, I can go back through and start kind of facilitating the questions. But you don't have to hold your questions until the end. You can post them, and then we'll go back through and try and hit as many as we can. So it's interesting to talk about holistic learning in an online environment, because one of the big challenges of online learning is how to do it holistically. And I think one of the challenges, one of even the criticisms of online learning is how can it be holistic when we're not in person? And I think that we've seen from the pandemic and from other challenges that we've had that there's definitely something to being in person, and to try and overcome that or do that online is a large task. But one of the things I want to emphasize is that online learning is a whole. It opens up a realm of possibility to do holistic learning in a way that maybe can't and isn't done in online or in person learning. And so we have a really unique modality with learning online. And as I want to kind of talk through some of the main ideas and points that we have in our book, Faith, Life, and Learning Online, is how can online institutions start to lean more into realizing that the mission that they have as a higher learning institution to help form whole people with not only knowledge, but spiritual formation or character formation, or whatever your context is. We understand as educators that learning is this whole person endeavor. And so how do we take advantage of the technology that we have in this really unique moment in history to help move that forward and see the opportunities that we have for online learning? So I want to take my few minutes and just talk through the main ideas that we structure through our book, Faith, Life, and Learning Online. And whether you're in a faith institutional context, or even if you're not, even if your institution is not faith-based, we think that there's really something to offer to administrators and faculty and course designers and student development professionals who are working in a unique environment, but can think holistically about learning and can work towards those goals. So really, we argue in the book that for higher education, holistic character formation is really a matter of institutional mission. And whether or not your modality is online or in person or hybrid, you have this missional mandate to do this holistic learning. And so our question is, all right, what does this look like then for my individual role and for me as an institution? And so in the first part of the book is really organized into 3 different sections. The first section is called Continuing the Legacy, Faith Formation for Online Christian Education. And it really argues that this idea of holistic learning is just part of the long process of higher education, particularly Christian higher education, that has been concerned with the whole person development, the mind, the character, the spirituality of students. And so the first chapter really looks at the current state of online spiritual formation. What we're doing here at LAPU is not necessarily new. We're not the only ones doing it. In the first chapter, we highlight other institutions, some of their practices. This is the chapter that's really going to have a lot of practical things that individual faculty members can do in their courses on how to do student engagement, different ideas that maybe you can think about implementing in your courses. And we look at this key question of how can online learning facilitate spiritual formation? And it's really interesting because there's been some important studies that have shown that it's the community that helps build formation, whether that community happens on campus or online. As we build those relationships in those communities, the outcomes are similar. And so just by nature of being on campus does not automatically mean that students are getting full spiritual development. They need to be involved in that, in the community and the opportunities. Same thing online. We have to work to create learning communities in order to facilitate and help support that spiritual formation. Chapter 2 then looks at how we at LAPU approach this holistic idea of faith and learning. And we talk about faith, life, and learning. And we have kind of organized a lot of our faith institutional outcome around faith, life, and learning. And the second part of the book, which I'll get into in a minute, kind of outlines our 4 areas that we approach and how we do that. The third chapter is on building a collaborative culture. John mentioned this earlier. I will say this book has 12 chapters, 8 different authors. And so there's different, we have different authors from different departments, faculty. The third chapter here is by our president, Dr. John Reynolds. And that again talks about how we organizationally and functionally build a collaborative culture, like from an administrative level, and what does that look like? Chapter 4 then is written by our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Wayne Herman, and he really gets into this idea of assessment. If you're part of higher ed, you know that this idea of regional accreditation is really important. And one of the questions is, okay, how are you measuring faith, life, and learning? And what does it mean to assess that and measure that? And so this is a really kind of nuts and bolts chapter of how we can actually measure these faith outcomes. And it's a really helpful chapter in that way. And then the 5th chapter looks at faith, life, and learning and institutional identity. It really says, we all have identity statements as institutions, and it says, well, if this is our identity, then how does that translate to what we're doing online, to be an online university? And how does that impact the commitments that we have and the resources we put towards faith formation? So the first chapter is kind of this big picture, the first section. Part 2 of the book then looks at faith, life, and learning in the curriculum. And we went through a process where we put together these 4 main ideas of what faith, life, and learning looks like for our students. What should they be able to do when they graduate from LAPU? And so we put that into 4 areas. They should understand a Christian worldview. They should learn to articulate how their life story connects to God's story in the Bible. They should be able to engage with diverse faith perspectives, and then they should see how their faith connects to their academic disciplines. And so these 4 chapters in part 2 of the book really gets into details of what this looks like, how is this implemented across the curriculum, how are our faith formation goals implemented and built into our course development process. So again, it looks at this holistic idea and says we can't just talk about Christian worldview. We have to look at how our students are actually learning Christian worldview in their classes. How are we doing course development and collaboration across that? And then the final part of the book looks at faith, life, and learning across the university. So beyond the curriculum, we have our chapter on coaching for faith formation, which Carrie will talk about here in a minute. Chapter 11 is on incarnational practices for faith formation. It looks at, again, how can we foster this creating of community in an online environment? What kind of resources do we have outside of the course? You could think of them as kind of extracurricular or co-curricular activities or opportunities. And then the final chapter is this call to cultivate mission across modalities. It's an invitation to you all, to other universities, other institutions, to say, what does it look like as higher ed moves more and more into the online environment? What does it look like to do this well? What are best practices? How can we learn from each other? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What can we still learn and work on together? So that's a quick summary of the book. I would say that the main my main takeaway from participating in the project, I was a co-editor with John. I have a couple chapters in there that I wrote. It's an exciting time for higher ed. I know that it's daunting and overwhelming, and the pandemic was very disruptive, but there's a lot of good thinking being done. There's a lot of good work. I know that we're in higher ed because we love learning, we love students, we love supporting students, and there's ways to do that well in the online environment. And the message of our webinar here is we do those things through collaborating together. As you look through the book, you'll see, and hopefully you'll hear today through the webinar, that we're only able to be holistic in our learning when we learn how to work across departments, when we partner with success coaches and other aspects of the university. When I realized that as a faculty member, I have a lot to learn about how adults learn through course design professionals that we have, and I can work with them, and I can become a better educator by working with other people, not just in my small field. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Carrie and let her take it away. Again, I see we got a couple questions coming in. Keep posting those, and after Carrie's done, we'll move into kind of a Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. My name is Carrie Ackerman. I'm a senior success coach. Senior does not refer to my age in this instance. It's more of the hierarchy for our department here. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit philosophy, but mostly I want to talk about practicality, because I know my role, a success coach, has different iterations across different universities, and I want to make sure that you know what we do here. So as far as philosophy goes, we primarily are, what I tell my students in the beginning is that I'm primarily your academic advisor. That's a word that most people know when they associate with students and what we do. So I start there. And when it comes to academic theory, we use the intrusive advising method. Basically what that is that we focus on relationship developing first, and we are proactive with students to try and ward off any sort of obstacles or problems before they come. Typically our students are, as mentioned before, these are working adults. They're not as much of the younger, although the further on we get into developing, we are realizing more and more typical age, if you want to call it that, college students are coming in more 18 to 20, but primarily we're looking at, my typical student is about a 30-something-year-old student with a family. That's the typical student that I work with. So our main job is to relationship build, to ward off problems ahead of time. What we have done here in our coaching department philosophy is we have kind of taken the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we've reformatted it for coaching here. So basically when it comes to the things that we want to get to eventually, which is purpose, calling, faith formation, for students to have the full experience to thrive or flourish here, we have to start with needs. So we start with students. I will introduce myself and I'll get to that in a second, but we don't talk about calling and purpose right away. We talk about things that students really are interested in, which is, do I have my books, financial aid, those sort of basic things? Do they have those in place? Those things to be able to do school well. If they don't really want to talk about calling and purpose right away. They want to talk about their books. Then we talk about work balance, life management, academic readiness. Do they have the time to go to school? And then eventually we build into conversations where we get to know each other over time. Relationship occurs, and that's when there's more of an opportunity to talk about calling, purpose, spiritual formation. So we look at the whole student, we look at the individualized student, but what does that look like? So practically speaking, I have a roster of students. I have active students. What I call active are students that are currently taking class. They range between currently 115 to around 135 or 140 students. That's a typical active coach's roster. Of those that are new, that's somewhere between 10 and 25 is the typical, and coaches will spend the majority of their time with the new students. We found that that is the most critical. I also have inactive students on my roster. Inactive simply means that they are not currently in class, but they have taken class within within the full school year. Once they have not taken a course for over a year, they are automatically withdrawn from the university and have to go through a re-enrollment process. So I have both active and inactive students. An inactive roster can be arranged. I will get a student somewhere between 4 to 0 weeks. We call that week 0 between when they start classes, and an introductory call is simply that. I will introduce myself as their coach, and I describe myself as a one-stop shop. That's what I describe myself. I say I'm primarily our academic advisor, but then I go through the whole scope of the role. I will say I'm here to provide resources. I'm here to help with basic financial aid. And then I even sort of give them a primer of I'm here for if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling apprehensive. And then I explain that this is also a Christian university. We say that right off the bat explicitly, both in our enrollment process and when I get a student. And I tell them that that can be a part of my care if they feel as comfortable for as little or as much. That's about as much as I say in the very beginning, because again, students are more wanting to know about financial aid, books, all those kind of things. Where can I find class? So I'll typically do that in the first call. And then as the calls go on before classes start, I learn a little bit more about why they're here, what their goals are. When I do introduce myself, I should say, I try and make it very personal. I offer a few personal details so that they feel invited to have a personal connection back. And but mostly in the beginning stage, it's all about developing trust with us as coaches. And the best way to provide trust is to make sure that we are useful and helpful. Is to make sure that we do know answers to their financial aid questions that are basic. And if not, we can scoot them somewhere else. It's to be able to prime them if they're feeling apprehensive. The majority of my first couple of calls with students after they know they have their books and where they can click to do orientation is to address their apprehension, because many of these adult learners are really nervous about starting school, especially online. How am I going to be able to do this? How am I going to be able to juggle? We try to normalize those fears of apprehension, and that also helps develop trust with coaches here. So a typical student will do that. We have most of our students who are degree seeking, that they're getting a good degree here. We also work with prep students who are on sort of getting a couple classes. But if we're working with a degree student, we're heavily involved in their first class, which is ISTU 100. So ISTU 100 is an orientation course that has been developed to help students get oriented to doing school online, and also talk about eventually their calling and their purpose and why they're here. One of the things that's really great about our model is that coaches are actually a part of that class, meaning that students will be required for points for homework to be able to have a coaching call with us for once a week. So for the first session, and a session here we do accelerated, so it is an 8-week course. A student will have a call with their course for points once a week. This establishes that's definitely a motivating factor for students to connect with us. But again, we try and be helpful. And so we are involved in that class as we go along here. A typical student and I will talk about things like how to navigate courses. That is a week requirement. That we build upon that on resources. Then we talk about their academic plan. And eventually we talk about other things like strengths-based things. We talk about goals, SMART goals, growth mindset, those kind of things that leads up to spiritual formation conversations. We have a pointed effort here at our university where every week 7 of a session, and again, we do sessions 8 weeks. So we have 3 semesters, we cut them in half. And so that we have 6 sessions a year here at LAPU. Each week, 7 of those 8 weeks, we focus on faith, life, and learning. And we make it a point typically to bring that up in our conversations with students at that time. What does spiritual formation look like practically? The most practical thing that I can say at first and foremost is prayer. So at the very first conversation, again, to go back to that, I will say to students, this is a Christian university. This is what I can provide spiritual support is how I frame it. And that one of the things I do is ask how comfortable they are. Judging on their comfort level, because there is a wide range of comfort level, I will ask about prayer, and prayer is a part of our conversations going forward from then on out, unless they explicitly say they do not want prayer or do not want that brought up, which some students do, and I honor that. Most students are, regardless of where they are on a spiritual spectrum, they're okay with prayer there. So we will start there. When it comes naturally for us as coaches is that we pair heavily with the academics department. We are involved with financial aid, we are involved with enrollment, but if there's one department that stands alone as the most important, it is professors, because professors and coaches are the ones that have the most interaction with students. And so in our case, we have those sort of questions embedded in the Success for the University online university, that orientation class, where there are questions about that, but we also have things like the Bible 100 class, which is our Exodus Deuteronomy that most students are wanting to take. Coaches will then talk to students about their coursework, talk to their students about what they're learning, and use that as a doorway for their own questions. And I can tell you that that is some of the most enriching conversations that I get to have as a coach, is students engaging with those deep questions. We are often now a safe space for students to do that because we have gotten to know them. We typically talk to students on the phone. That's primarily our goal. That is the personal connection, and they are on the go. So I talk to students when they're on breaks, sometimes when most of the time when they're in the car, when they have a few minutes to kind of sneak me in, that's when we have our conversations. And a lot of times that phone creates what we call almost a quasi-confessional, where we hear a lot about student stories, and then we use that as a gateway then to be able to engage with them as much as they feel comfortable. One of the things, though, that I do want to end with here when it comes to faith integration is that that is not the primary goal. We want to respect students for where they are. We want to encourage growth, but not force it, is the best way I know how to describe it. And lastly, the point about holistic care and partnering with academics and other parts of the university, I have to say that it is critical. Oftentimes, as coaches, we are able to help support what the professors are doing, because students will come to us sometimes with questions or frustrations, and we're able to kind of fill in that gap. And so there's a lot of conversations back and forth between coaches and professors, which make it, I think, the most enriching experience. So that is just a little bit about coaching and what we do. If you have more questions, pop them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. All right. At this point, as planned, we have quite a bit of time to facilitate some questions here. So I see we've had a few come in, but before we jump into those, I want to give you all a few more minutes to think and put in some more questions. I'm going to prime us here with 2 questions. The first one I'm going to address to John, and I'll jump in as well. But what are practical things faculty do in courses to help establish a connection with students?
Excuse me. One of the things that I do is I make myself available to students, and primarily how that happens is I respond to student emails, student posts, student questions that are sent to me personally as quickly as I can. I know that as a university, we have a 24-hour turnaround time, but like most human beings, the students will email me at the last minute, and they're in a quandary. And so I do what I can to respond to them as quickly as I possibly can. I was an online student myself, and sometimes I felt like when I sent an email to the instructor, it was going out to outer space, never to be returned. So practically speaking, I will get back to students as quickly as possible, just for no other reason than to relieve the stress.
Yeah, for me, I try and go out of my way, like John said, for students to know and see that I'm available. So I'm always, especially at the beginning of the course, I'll post announcements, just really encouraging students. One thing that I've started doing recently with the university, we have a phone system that I can send text messages through, and I'll text all my students the first week, and started getting a lot of responses back from them, just because students are on their phones and they text, and if they can text me a question, that's proven to be very helpful for them. And then I've also started to I do video announcements, especially again at the start of the course, so students can see who I am, they can hear my voice, they can hopefully feel like I'm approachable. And again, just constantly inviting students to come. I tell them, I don't know you're struggling if you don't tell me. This is the one thing about being online, is I don't see you kind of sleeping in the back of class if I'm in person. You have to tell me that you're missing things. So again, emphasizing the responsibility of the student, but then when they step up to help to ask for questions, again, making sure that I'm available. And that leads me to my second question for Carrie, and then I'm going to start diving into the questions we're getting in the chat. Carrie, what are students asking for from their professors?
What we typically see for students asking from their professors is similar to what you guys have already alluded to, which is connection and availability. Students like to have be able to connect with their professors if they can, and also visibility, as Brant alluded to as well. Anything that sort of the intimidation factor is lessened. So video introductions are great, and when a professor has a timely response is wonderful. The other thing that I hear a lot is flexibility, and what I mean by that is that we have students who, because they are doing life in the midst, they have a lot of things that have happened. I know, especially since the last couple of years in the pandemic, I work with primarily health science students, and they've had a lot of things to go on, and they really appreciate when their professors have compassion on the different ways that life is throwing at them and some of the curveballs and things they have to navigate. So I think care, compassion, and availability are the pillars that they're looking for, that we see.
Great. All right, I'm going to start navigating through some of these questions. I'll start with this one. John, what are ways that we encourage our faculty to share faith in their classes?
Well, I think it should already be built into the curriculum. You know, for a lot of classes, there are prompts, there are assignments related to some sort of an assignment related to responding from a Christian perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean that the students have to be a Christian. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to believe anything, but the fact that what they need to do is to demonstrate that they are familiar with, for example, a Christian worldview. So a lot of the stuff is already, a lot of aspects of faith integration is already built into the curriculum. And it's just a matter of instructors teasing that out and just having conversations with students as whatever the students are talking about.
Yeah, and I would add, like Carrie mentioned, in week 7 across the university, we do this Faith, Life, and Learning Week, where we put out content for students, and then we try and encourage our faculty to maybe use that week 7 as an opportunity to post maybe their own story or testimony, to share a little bit about their own faith in the context of that week 7, since it's something we're doing as a university. And then we do encourage, it's interesting, and I teach our Bible courses, and so for me it's easier because we're talking about the Bible and faith and things, and so I can more easily and maybe more naturally put in kind of some of my own stories or share some of my own faith. And like John said, in all of our courses, and maybe if for our business courses or something, I know that we do incorporate Christian worldview, but it's also the faculty and the instructors looking for opportunities to incorporate and share a little bit about their own story as they're going through the teaching, but always creating, I would say, a safe environment where students can be who they are and they don't have to feel like they're going to get a bad grade if they're not a Christian, because that's not the point. It's about being on the journey with students and helping them realize that spirituality is part of holistic learning. I want to go to this, a couple questions we have in our Q&A. I know I have a chat window, and then we also have a Q&A window, so you can use either. I'm looking at both. It's a technology question. What technology tools are used for classes and for community? For example, phone, email, LMS, what are specific examples? And then another question, what formats are used in online learning, synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid? I'll talk a little bit about those. So at LAPU, we are asynchronous, which means we're time agnostic, which means students don't have live Zoom classes that they're coming to. Each week we have, they have assignments to do and discussion forums and deadlines to meet, but the lecture presentations, the course material is all posted up there in in the week for the student, and they get to it on their time, and then they meet the deadlines throughout the week. So there's not a live one-on-one component. I do, there's certainly other ways to go about that. Some universities, or programs will have a live component. Some will have a hybrid where you're doing both. And I think a lot of the principles that we're talking about can be used in either. It just is a matter of whatever you're going to do it well, I would say. And hopefully some of the tools and perspectives that we bring home, especially in the book, if you're interested in this more, there's a lot of really practical things that kind of dive deeper into how to structurally organize some of these things. As far as the technology, we use an LMS, we use Moodle, put our courses together. One thing that we've launched is called the My LAPU app, and we developed an app that students have on their mobile phone, and they can not only get to all their courses, they can see their student account, they can pay their bills, they can buy their books. And then there's a kind of a social media component to it where students can join different communities. We have a faith, life, and learning community on the app where we post, faith formation resources. There's an LAPU moms group, there's a veterans group, there's learning communities for each different major. And so we try and facilitate those communities through the app. It's a work in progress. It's kind of a new development for us, and it definitely takes a lot of facilitation and work, but that's something. John, do you want to add anything to the technology?
Yeah, well, I want to move back to this idea of asynchronous, synchronous, and remote. I just have a couple of comments. What's interesting is that what research has shown is that most students, even though they're online, they will enroll in a university within 100 miles of where they live. I'm always curious about an online university actually requiring students to be on campus for at least a portion of the class. If they're within 100 miles, that's easy driving distance. And I think that would enhance the educational experience. But I watch the literature for that. I'm not exactly sure how far that sort of a concept has gone. The other set of comments I want to make is this distinction between remote teaching and online education. One of the great things that the pandemic showed us is that there were schools, both colleges and high schools, who just said, "Hey, we can't teach in class anymore. We have to go remote. We'll just throw our stuff online." And that's pretty much what they did, is they threw their stuff online. And there's several news articles out there that really were really critical of the online, as though, and the problem is they were lumping what we do as online educators with what these other universities and high schools did by just cramming their in-class curriculum into an online format. Not to be critical of the reason why. I mean, they saw online as an alternative. The concern and the desire for academic integrity really forced us to look at how we were going to construct classes from the ground up, to be online as a natural form of the curriculum. And so this is where you get into this idea of the app. This is where you get into the idea of a standardized curriculum, taking advantage of the technology to really blow out a curriculum to be fully online, to take advantage of all of the technology that we have out there, as opposed to remote teaching, which again, the organizations and the schools did the best they could, but they are the ones that got most of the press. And my thought is that's not how most of online education works.
Yeah, and I think I want to piggyback on that and pull out the distinction with remote teaching. Oftentimes, and even I'll just say with remote teaching, it's often the instructor or the faculty member or the teacher having to pull everything together by themselves and push out the class. When we talk about online learning, and again, we emphasize this idea of collaboration, is when we're putting courses together, there's a team of, I don't even know how many people work on it, half a dozen across departments. As the faculty, I serve as this kind of subject matter expert, and I bring, the content that needs to be in the course. But I'm also have learned that it's one thing to be an expert on content and another thing to be an expert on how students learn. And my PhD did a great job of teaching me a lot about theology. But I maybe took an afternoon seminar on how to put a syllabus together. And so having experts who know learning design and adult learning, and then technology people who can help me create incredible, presentations and learning things, really just makes this whole collaborative effort. And then in the courses with the success coaches working, one of the classes that I see here, or one of the questions is, do we contact success coaches if a student is missing and hasn't participated in class? And Carrie, I know that you all, have eyes on students. I believe, I'm not sure how all of our systems work. I think we have systems that send you maybe alerts if students aren't showing up. And then, or if I notice that as a professor, we have systems in place where I can submit a form, I can get in contact with the coach, and we can start working together. I do work through my assistant dean, is often my liaison with my coaches, because I might not know who a student's coach is. And so I, send a Slack, we're on Slack now. So I send a Slack note to my assistant dean and can start to collaborate that way. But Carrie, what thoughts do you have on that?
Yes, so oftentimes coaches will know things that professors don't, or in some cases vice versa. So we don't typically reach out to professors on behalf of students because we're constantly trying to encourage that relationship with student to professor. But there are ways that professors will submit alerts if they've noticed some concerning things with students in their class, and then coaches will be able to officially follow up. So there's a system process in place with that.
Good. And then Carrie, another question here about one of the major challenges for adult students is time management. So how do coaches and how can even faculty help students build time management skills?
Let's see, I have 3 tips right off the bat. The first one is a planning session. So what we talk about with students who are starting classes is we say, this is like a part-time job. Let's look at your schedule and ask them specifically where in their schedule are they going to make room for school. So we do that. That's the first thing, is to have a planning session. When we encourage that on a weekly basis for students to go in, look in their classes and plan ahead. It's simple, but it is one of the most effective ways that we have for time management. The second is to lean into who students already are. I tell students that if you're a night owl, do not try and get up early. It won't work. It just won't work if you're doing homework. If you're a night owl, you might have to stay up a little bit later. If you like to see things visually, get a planner. So lean into who you are naturally is another way. And the third way is what we like to say in coaching is a fulcrum. This is something that we are taught when we're in training, is to let students anticipate challenges that are coming. Life is going to happen. That's what I say. And sometimes when you're talking about a teeter-totter balancing life with school, you have to slide that fulcrum based on need. So if your child is sick, you need to attend to your child. If that means that your homework is maybe a couple hours late, that might be a typical thing. Or some things that you have said yes to in the past, as far as maybe social events, you'll have to say no to. So those kind of things is to anticipate life. Those 3 tips, I would say.
Good, thanks. Okay, another question here. I'll start with John, and then Carrie and I can chime in. Do we think online teaching is the future of education?
That's a great question. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that if you take a look at the recent history of the disruption of higher education, and I don't know how far back to go on this. I was conscious in the 1960s, and higher ed looked vastly different than it does now. I don't see that disruption changing. I see more and more options. And of course, the flavor of the month right now is online. You may remember 2, 3, 4 years ago, MOOCs were in, massive online open courses were in. They seem to have faded a little bit. So I think online is going to be part of the future. I don't think it's going to be the entire future.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think it will continue to grow and become more and more of a viable option for more people. I think the cost issue of higher ed is something that higher ed is dealing with and struggling with on a national level. And I think online has a unique affordability aspect to it. I hope that higher ed doesn't become so polarized that only wealthy people can attend on campus. I think that I've also seen, people learn different ways. Some people thrive online, some people, they just don't. And I think that's okay. People learn different ways and we need to be able to provide those different learning opportunities. We have a couple minutes left. Carrie, I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about, we'll see if another question comes in, but if you could share, I'm thinking about your chapter as we close here when you talked about, if you could think about a story, a success story of a student kind of having a holistic, maybe transformative faith experience, through our online university, just as an example of maybe how students changed and that indeed it is possible to see these kind of changes happen.
I do. I have one. I'll leave her name out just in case, just for privacy, but I had a student come in who said that she was not necessarily interested in faith. She came from a Catholic background, which is typical for a lot of students. They will come from a church background, but have not been attending or not practicing for several years. And she took a Bible class and she started to talk about what she was learning with me, and we were able to have conversations, and she would get excited about what she was learning and how being able to learn more about the Bible and where it came from sort of sparked her faith in a way that she hadn't been before. And so I saw her kind of being reluctant to sort of being warm to it. And then the next conversation that we had, she said that she had been talking to other Christians about this because she was talking about her learning, and she and I were able to engage with conversations, and her excitement level grew to the point where she was even considering changing career choices and callings based on her newfound engagement. So that is just a small example. I know we're short on time, but for some of students who have misconceptions about what Christianity is or scripture is, or even spiritual engagement, just being able to have a connection already present in courses, as John alluded to, with coursework, followed up with a success coach or a professor to be able to unpack those feelings, has quite a potential for great impact and change. And now the student is thriving, and she did switch gears and is trying to go to a university and calling that is different than she would before. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone for giving us your time today. Just really a privilege to share with you all about holistic learning. I do want to encourage you to keep an eye out for our next webinar on human-centered learning and design coming up in July. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much.